Shalom and good morning all as we continue our Genesis to Revelation studies of what is needed for salvation, where we try to get rid of traditions of men and cleave to the commandments of God. Today we are on the book of 2 Samuel, chapters 13 to 16. When I did this study last year, it was the time of Passover. So I also included some notes on the Crucifixion. So it is a bit early for this year's Passover, which is in a couple of weeks' time, but I will nevertheless cover that topic today. So before going on today's title study, as I said, it was time for Passover last year when I did the study. I will do a little bit on the Messiah's Resurrection Memorial. A few notes. Now the period is a memorial of God's deliverance of Israel from Egypt. We read this in Exodus chapters 12 verse 14, and that says, "And this day shall be unto you a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to Yahweh throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever." Now we have covered the composition of Israel. So God is speaking to the composition, the church, as it says in Acts chapter 7 verse 38, I believe, started in the wilderness. So this congregation was made up of all the people that came out of Egypt, not just Hebrews, mostly non-Hebrews, i.e. the servants, because 70 Hebrews from Jacob's loins went in together with their household, and their household consists of much more than the Hebrews themselves, as was the ratio, say, with Abraham, when he took his 380 men and got them circumcised. And Jacob, who ran away as one man to Laban, married two of Laban's daughters, 2 maids, and got 12 sons from those maids. So and then he came back with a multitude of other servants and people that when he met Esau, his brother, he was able to divide them up into different companies. So I'm showing you the non-Hebrews are more than the Hebrews. So this message that God has given to the congregation is not just for Hebrews, for the whole congregation, as today we'll say Jew and Gentile, the ones who want to follow God's way. So do not think, as is commonly taught by Christianity, that these are just for Jews or Hebrews. It is for everyone who wants to be have God as their Yahweh God as their God, as Ruth said to Naomi. So now I've covered that point. Let's continue. Now also it's the beginning of the year. The beginning of God's year is not January the 1st, but the month of Passover. If you read it in Exodus chapters 12 verse 2, it tells you. So whenever you see Passover, you know that is the beginning of God's year. Passover comes 14 days into the first month of God's year. So continuing. There are some Christians teaching that we no longer can keep the Passover, only celebrate it. A lady sent me such a video teaching by a pastor recently. My reply was, Yahweh God does not give us commandments to keep forever, as he says, throughout your generations, as he says, if we could not do it. So some examples of what Yahweh said. Exodus chapter 12 verse 14. "And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it," not celebrate it, "a feast to Yahweh throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever." Exodus chapter 23 verse 14. "3 times thou shalt keep a feast unto me in the year." Exodus 23:15. "Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread," and so forth. And lastly, Leviticus chapters 23 verse 41. "And ye shall keep it a feast unto Yahweh 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations." So which part of keep and which part of forever do these teachers find hard to understand? We are to understand God's words, not interpret any. So as I said, which part of keep and forever in your generations is hard to understand. If teachers do not know, then accept rather than try and be a teacher of the law, especially when they do not keep the feast or the laws of God. Otherwise, such teachers and pastors come under 1 Timothy chapters 1 verse 6, which says, "From which some have swerved, having turned aside unto vain jangling," or traditions of men, I would say. Verse 7, "desiring to be teachers of the law, understanding neither what they say, nor whereof they affirm," which in plain English, they do not know what they are talking about. They change God's keep to celebrate, using their own eyes rather than God's. Desire not to obey rather than obey is their reason why they come up with these excuses. 2 Corinthians 11 verse 13. "For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ." In other words, they make out that they are teaching God's words. 11:14. "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works." Now, one of such teachers' reasoning is, there is no temple. So he says, therefore we cannot keep the feast days. As I said to a lady last night, people confuse the timing of the event, the appointed days, to the sacrifices for sin by Yeshua. As Peter also said, that they do not understand some of Paul's writings, because in 2 Peter 3:16, also in all his epistles, speaking in them of these things, in which are some things hard to understand, so hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned and unstable wrestle as they do also the other scriptures unto their own destruction. So these teachers are unlearned in the ways of the Old Testament, the laws of God, and they then come up with reasons that we need a temple to keep the appointed times. The appointed times were from Genesis chapter 1:14, if you go back to that lesson, and they were kept before there was a temple. Abraham kept them, Noah kept them, before the temple was built by Moses. However, coming on to the temple, which was destroyed in AD 70. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 19, one of Paul's own writings, tells us about the temple. "What? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which you have of God, and ye are not of your own?" And I could give other verses that talk about the temple. So we still have a temple today where we offer sacrifices of praise at the appointed times rather than the animal bloods, if people only understand Paul's writings. So Yeshua as a Passover lamb, this memorial, redemptive memorial, is continued through the Messiah. John chapter 1 verse 6, "And looking upon Yeshua as he walked, he said, Behold the Lamb of God." So we do not need a physical animal anymore. Luke 22 verse 19, "And he took bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave unto them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me." Now this do is not a weekly communion or a quarterly communion as some denominations do. It was a Passover meal Yeshua was having as the memorial with his apostles. It is a once per year event, not, as I said, a weekly communion or other time event. Now, it happened over Passover, an 8-day festival of Yahweh. Exodus chapters 12 verse 3 and 28 is a reference. Not a 1.5 day one over Easter, i.e. Good Friday to Easter Sunday. Yeshua died on Wednesday 3 p.m., which the Bible calls the 9th hour in Matthew chapters 27 verse 46 and verse 50, and was put in the tomb before sunset. Assuming the sunset was 6 p.m., he went in the tomb about 6 p.m. or just before, on Wednesday evening, not Friday, Good Friday or a Bad Friday, at between 3 and 6 p.m. That was to fulfill the only sign, he said, that would be, as Jonah was in the belly of the whale, he would be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. So he rose sometime after 6 p.m. the 7th day, which is our Saturday and not Sunday morning. Another common error of these unlawful keeping teachers. Now, how do we get Saturday 6 p.m., which in biblical terms is the first day of the week? Because the first day of the week starts when the 7th day finishes. In Bible terms, the day starts and ends at the evening, sunset. If we read Genesis chapters 1 verse 5, verse 8 and verse 13, it will tell you the evening and the morning were the first day. And other places, the reference which you all should know, the day starts in the evening. So by the time Mary and the apostles went early our Sunday, which is another part, latter part of the biblical first day of the week, he was already risen. Now it says they went when as the sun was rising, whilst it was still dark in some other verses. So, and he wasn't there. I mean, he had already risen this Saturday night, what we call Saturday night. So Matthew 28 verse 1, Mark verse 16:2, Luke 24:1, and John 20 verse 1. It says he was already risen and gone. Thus, rising early the first day means just after our Saturday evening. Saturday evening, let's say 6 p.m. is the start of the first day. The early part of the first day would be 7, 8, 9 p.m. Not Sunday morning, which is way coming towards the end or halfway past the first day. So, how can we prove this? Matthew chapters 12 verse 40. As Yeshua says, the only sign that will be given of him is, for as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in a whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. John chapters 11 verse 9, Yeshua answered, are they not 12 hours in a day? If any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world. So there must be 12 hours in each day to complete your 3 days and 3 nights. You do not get 12 hours from 3 p.m. Friday evening, when it gets dark very soon. Nor you may get the 12 hours on a Saturday, but you'll not get the third set of 12 hours on a Sunday to get the 3 days. And I won't even go into the 3 nights. So there's no way it can be Friday sunset to Sunday morning, because you do not get the sign of the 3 days and 3 nights. Each day having 12 hours and not a bit of sunlight, as some people try to say. They're going to class a bit of sunlight as a day. So as I said, we cannot get the sign of 3 days and 3 nights from 6 p.m. Friday to 6 a.m. Sunday, especially with each day having 12 hours. The error in early belief of Friday to Sunday is not knowing the annual holy days of God are called Sabbaths. So when they see the word Sabbath, Christians are mainly taught to think of the weekly one, the Friday evening to Saturday evening one. And they do not know that he died on a weekly Sabbath, like the Passover and unleavened bread ones. So I said God called all of them Sabbaths, and thinking the word is only used for weekly ones. I've covered that, but technically, so I've covered that. So lastly, some people have got confused by Luke chapters 24 verse 21, which says, but we trust, this is when Yeshua was talking to the 2 apostles after he had risen, and it says, but we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And beside all this, today is the 3rd day since these things are done. Now they count 3 days, the 3rd day, saying, Friday's the 1st day, Saturday's the 2nd day, and Sunday's the 3rd day, which is when Yeshua saw them. This violates the 12 hours per day scripture, as I just explained above, the Jonas one. But more simply, mathematically, it also violates how we count. Imagine you are standing at the bottom of some steps and take one step up. You are no longer where you stood. Thus, where you started is not counted as number one, as one and Friday. So therefore, Friday cannot be counted as one. You do not count where you're starting from. You count the first movement you've made, one step up. If you repeat for steps 2 and 3, you will now be 3 steps up from where you started. Where you started is 0. It is not 1. So when people try and use Luke 24 verse 21 and say this is the third day, the apostles were not counting the Friday as the first one. That is 0. So now let us put that in terms of days. Starting at 6 p.m. Friday sunset, when he was rushed to get into tomb because it's coming up to the Sabbath, not the weekly one, but the annual one. When he was put in the tomb, as I said, one or the first day after would be Saturday, or to sunset 6 p.m. Saturday. By the time the 2 apostles saw Yeshua during the day of the first day, our Sunday, that at best would be the second, not the third day, if we were counting from Friday 6 p.m. However, if he gave up the ghost 3 p.m. on Wednesday and was rushed into the tomb by 6 p.m., after that we start counting. If we say the conversation between the Messiah and the 2 apostles was about noon, the first day of the week, what we call Sunday today, and that they called that the third day, count backwards until you come to 0, and we should get the Wednesday sunset laying in the tomb. So let us worship in spirit, practice, and believe the truth, not an erroneous tradition of ignorant teachers. Okay, coming on to our study for today. Second Samuel chapter 13 verse 16. Now in this we'll get some of the entertainment stories. As I said, some of the God's teachings is entertaining as well. We'll see Tamar gets raped by her half brother, and this is going to be a foundation of a major part of the Bible, and David going on a run again as he did from Saul.
Reading from chapter 13 verse 1, which is where Amnon and Tamar, both children of David, Amnon rapes Tamar. And it came to pass after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. And Amnon was so vexed that he fell sick for his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin. And Amnon thought it hard for him to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimei, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very subtle man. And he said unto him, Why art thou being the king's son, lean from day to day? Wilt thou not tell me? And Amnon said unto him, I love Tamar my brother, Absalom's sister. And Jonadab said unto him, Lay thee down on thy bed, and make thyself sick. And when thy father cometh to see thee, say unto him, I pray thee, let my sister Tamar come, and give me meat, and dress the meat in my sight, that I may see it, and eat it at her hand. Verse 8. So Tamar went to her brother Ammon's house, and he was laid down, and she took flour and kneaded it, and made cakes in his sight, and did bake the cakes. And she took a pan and poured them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, Have all men from me. So he sent all the men out, and they went out every man from him. And Amnon said unto Tamar, Bring the meat into the chamber, that I may eat of thine hand. And Tamar took the cakes which she had made, and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. And when she had brought them in unto him to eat, he took she answered him, Nay, my brother, do not force me to do such a thing, or not to be done in Israel. Do not do this folly. And whither shall I cause my shame to go? As for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore, I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee. Howbeit he would not hearken unto her voice, but being stronger than she, forced her and lay with her. Verse 19. And Tamar put ashes on her head, and rent her garment, and divers colours that was on her, and laid her hand on her head, and went on crying. And Absalom her brother said unto her, Hath Ammon thy brother been with thee? But hold now thy peace, my sister, he is thy brother, regard not this thing. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. But when the king heard of all these things, he was very angry, and Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon, because he had forced his sister. Verse 23. And it came to pass after 2 full years that Absalom had sheep shearers in Baal-hazor, which is beside Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. Verse 28. Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, Mark ye now when Ammon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say unto you, Smite Ammon, then kill him. Fear not, have not I commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. And the servants of Absalom did unto Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and every man got him up upon his mule and fled. Verse 32. And Jonadab the son of Shimei, David's brother, answered and said, Let not my lord suppose that they have slain all thy young men, the king's sons, for Ammon only is dead. For by the appointment of Absalom this hath been determined from the day that he forced his sister Tamar. Verse 37. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur, and David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur, and was there 3 years. And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Ammon, seeing he was dead. Chapter 14. Absalom returns to Jerusalem. First verse 1. Now Joab the son of Jeruiah perceived that the king's heart was towards Absalom. And Joab sent to Tikha, and fetched thence a wise woman, and said unto her, I pray thee, feign thyself, pretend thyself to be a mourner, and put on now mourning apparel, and anoint not thyself with oil, but be as a woman that had a long time mourned for the dead, and come to the king, and speak on this matter, and speak in this manner unto him. Verse 14. For he must needs die, and so then he comes and tells David a story, and this is what David says. For he must die, and are as water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Neither doth God respect any person, yet doth he devise means that is banished, be not expelled from him. Verse 18. Then the king answered and said unto the woman, Hide not from me, I pray thee, the thing that I shall ask thee. And the woman said, Let my lord the king now speak. And the king said, Is not the hand of Joab with thee in all of this matter? And the woman answered and said, As thy soul liveth, my lord the king, none can turn to the right hand or to the left hand, or from my lord the king hath spoken. For thy servant Joab, he bade me, and he put all these words in my mouth of thine handmaid, to fetch about this form of speech hath thy servant Joab done this thing. And my lord is wise, according to the wisdom of an angel of God, to know all things that are in the earth. And the king said unto Joab, Behold now, I have done this thing. Go therefore and bring the young man Absalom again. Verse 23. So Joab arose and went to Geshur, and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, Let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house, and saw not the king's face. Verse 28. So Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, and saw not the king's face. Chapter 15. Absalom's conspiracy against David. Reading from verse 1.
So just go a little bit on addition. Joab exhibited the spirit of reconciliation, going far lengths to accomplish it when he asked that maid to go to the king and so do what she did. He had nothing personally to gain. Not many Christians have such a character of reconciliation, even when in their own family interest. A spirit God himself possessed, and we are advised to see or to have the spirit of reconciliation. As a result, many opportunities are lost because Christians do not forgive each other or try and solve their problems. 2 Corinthians chapters 5 verse 18. And all things are of God, who have reconciled us to himself by Yeshua the Messiah, and have given to us the ministry of reconciliation, to wit, that God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself, not imputing their trespasses unto them, and have committed unto us the word of reconciliation. So that is what we are called to be like with our brethren. Hebrews chapters 2 verse 17. Wherefore in all things it behoved him to be made like unto his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. So, if you want to be Christ-like, start making reconciliation between your brethren when you have disagreements. And don't make assumptions and let things become worse and worse. Many scriptures teaches us to leave your sacrifice at the altars and go and make peace with your brethren. Okay, continuing from chapter 15 verse 1, Absalom's conspiracy.
It came to pass after this that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And as it was that when any man that had a controversy came to the king for judgment, then Absalom called unto him and said, Of what city art thou? And he said, Thy servant is of one of the tribes of Israel. And Absalom said unto him, See, thy matters are good and right, but there is no man deputed of the king to hear thee. Absalom said moreover, O that I were made judge in the land, that every man which have any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. And it was so that when any man came near to him to do him obeisance, he put forth his hand and took him and kissed him. And on this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Verse 10. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as ye hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. And Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. So I've left out certain verses for you to read the whole thing to get the context. Absalom pretended to be the judge of the people and stole their hearts, and then he arranged a conspiracy to take over the kingdom from David. Reading from chapter 15 verse 13, when David now flees Jerusalem. And there came a messenger to David, saying, The hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto all his servants that were with him at Jerusalem, Arise, and let us flee, for we shall not else escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly, and bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servant said unto the king, Behold, thy servants are ready to do whatsoever my lord the king shall appoint. And the king went forth, and all his household of him. And the king left 10 women which were concubines to keep the house. And lo, Zadok also and all the Levites were with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had done passing out of the city. And the king said unto Zadok, Carry back the ark of God into the city. If I shall find favour in the eyes of Yahweh, he will bring me again, and show me both it and his habitation. Verse 30. And David went up by the ascent of Mount Olivet, and wept as he went up, and had his head covered, and he went barefoot. And all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up weeping as they went up. And one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Yahweh, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. Chapter 16, verse 1. And when David was a little past the top of the hill, behold, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of asses saddled, and upon them 200 loaves of bread, and 100 bunches of raisins, and 100 of summer fruit, and a bottle of wine. And the king said unto Ziba, What meanest thou by this? And Ziba said, The asses be for the king's household to ride on, and the bread and summer fruits for the young men to eat, and the wine that such as be fed in the wilderness be drink. So Mephibosheth, if you remember, was a crippled son of Jonathan that David showed kindness to. So it's now being repaid to him. Chapter 16, verse 8. Yahweh hath returned unto thee all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose stead thou hast reigned, and Yahweh hath delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom thy son, and behold, thou art taken in thy mischief, because thou art a bloody man. Chapter 16, verse 15. And Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. Verse 21. And Ahithophel said unto Absalom, Go in unto thy father's concubines, which he hath left to keep the house, and all Israel shall hear that thou art abhorred of thy father. Then shall the hands of all that are with thee be strong. So they spread Absalom a tent unto the top of the house, and Absalom went in unto his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. And the counsel of Ahithophel, which he counselled in those days, was as if a man had inquired at the oracle of God. So was all the counsel of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom. So going in onto the old king's concubines or wives is a sign of taking over the power. We shall see this later with Jonathan when one of the sons asks Jonathan's mother if he can have David's ex-wife to be a wife. I think we saw one of the King Saul's.
So that's Solomon, not Jonathan. Solomon.
King Saul's bodyguard, I can't quite remember his name. He was accused by Saul's sons of sleeping with Saul's concubine, and that was what led that bodyguard of Saul to pass the kingdom over to David. So you see a lot of similarities with the stories and how the law works. Now, all of this came about, one, because of what David did with Bathsheba's one part, but also that David did not punish Ammon for his raping of Tamar as within the law. If you force a woman in the city or in the field, that kind of law. We So we had the same thing where Potiphar's wife sent out her soldiers so she can seduce Joseph, and here we have Ammon also sent out his soldiers, his guards, so that he can do what he did in a secret. But there's no real comment of there's no real salvational issues in the way of history. Tamar was Ammon's half sister, as Sarah was Abraham's half sister. Had one parent, the same but not the other. Now David would have allowed them to marry if Ammon had done it within the law, because they were half sisters, not full brother and sister. Chapter 16, verse 22 is one of the things that Prophet Nathan predicted as a result of David's sin with Bathsheba in 2 Samuel chapters 12, verses 1 to 14, where God said he will make what David did in secret be done in public. So that's why it did on the rooftops there. Now it took over 40 years for God's promise and consequence of David's sins to come about. Consequences of our sinful past may always come back to affect us, even though we repented and God forgave us. There's still consequences of the actions that we've done. Shalom, until tomorrow, God willing.